They called it a piece of junk, a stamped steel afterthought that looked more like a tool pulled from a mechanic's bench than a weapon for the battlefield. Yet when U.S. soldiers waded ashore in the Pacific, it was this ugly little submachine gun, the M3, the grease gun, that many trusted with their lives. December 1943. In the steaming jungles of New Guinea, Marines advancing through tangled palms discovered that conventional rifles could be awkward in the suffocating undergrowth. The long, heavy Garand snagged on vines, the Thompson rattled loudly and drained precious ammunition. The enemy was close, too close for comfort. The Japanese soldier did not fear long-range firefights. He embraced sudden ambushes, close-quarters charges, and desperate last stands in bunkers. Against that kind of enemy, what mattered most was not beauty, but brutal practicality. The M3 was never meant to impress. Designed in Detroit by General Motors' Inland Division, it was built in the middle of America's push for industrial mass production. Every line of its body screamed simplicity: a tubular receiver, sheet metal construction, and a collapsible wire stock that folded like a coat hanger. Soldiers joked that it resembled a garage tool more than a firearm, hence the name grease gun. But appearances deceived. Chambered in 45 ACP, the same hard-hitting cartridge as the M1911 pistol, it delivered a devastating punch at short range. In the Pacific Theater, where firefights erupted at 20 yards or less, that punch mattered more than elegance. A squad clearing a palm-thatched hut could not rely on long rifles to sweep corners. They needed something compact, steady, and reliable in damp heat. The grease gun, with its slower rate of fire around 450 rounds per minute, allowed bursts to stay controlled. Unlike the Thompson, which tended to climb in recoil, the M3 could be held steady even in sweaty, gloved hands. It gave an American rifleman the ability to match Japanese close in ferocity shot for shot. By the time Marines pushed into Bougainville and Saipan, word spread quickly. The grease gun might look cheap, but it worked. Soldiers learned that when the night filled with cries of "Banzai!" and the jungle exploded with charging figures, a short, ugly weapon slung across their chest could make the difference between holding the line and being overrun. By the summer of 1944, the Pacific War had become a grinding series of island battles, Saipan, Guam, Peleliu, each demanding American forces to root out determined Japanese defenders from caves, pillboxes, and concrete bunkers. Traditional rifles often felt like relics of another war. In the claustrophobic darkness of these fortifications, the M3 grease gun revealed why it had been created. It was compact enough to maneuver through tight corners, its wire stock folding instantly when a Marine had to crawl into a low dugout. The slower cyclic rate meant fewer wasted rounds, which mattered when resupply was measured in crates dragged ashore under fire. American commanders quickly noticed that small squads equipped with the grease gun could clear fortified rooms faster, with fewer casualties, than those armed solely with rifles. The 45 ACP caliber rounds punched through thin barricades, wooden shutters, even light jungle cover. Japanese soldiers, accustomed to fighting against long rifles or the rattling spray of Thompsons, suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by short, deliberate bursts that shredded concealment. Yet the grease gun was more than just a weapon for the individual soldier. It was a reflection of America's wartime philosophy, efficiency over refinement. Each M3 cost only around $20 to produce, compared to over $200 for a Thompson. In the vast assembly plants of Detroit and Lansing, entire weapons were stamped and welded in hours, boxed, and shipped by the thousands. By the time a Marine landed on Guam, it was not uncommon for his squad to carry multiple M3s. The sheer volume of production meant every platoon had access, ensuring that no American unit was forced to fight bunker to bunker with rifles alone. For tank crews, the weapon was nearly perfect. Inside the cramped confines of Shermans or amphibious tractors, a Thompson could snag on hatches or crowd already limited space. The grease gun, shorter and lighter, fit neatly into racks or rested against the bulkhead. When hatches flew open under sudden attack, crews could respond with immediate, heavy firepower rather than relying on sidearms. The Japanese defenders, resourceful and fanatical, learned quickly that American firepower had adapted. What once seemed like an army slowed by bulky rifles now possessed a weapon tailored for close-range destruction. It was not glamorous, but it was relentless, and in the Pacific that was all that mattered. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the Pacific War, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more WWII stories. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. On the volcanic slopes of Iwo Jima in February 1945, the M3's role became even more defined. The battle was fought in a landscape that seemed designed to nullify traditional tactics: black sand beaches that swallowed boots, tunnels honeycombing the island, and defenders who refused to surrender. For American infantry, every cave mouth hid danger, every shattered bunker threatened sudden fire. In such an environment, the grease gun became more than a weapon. It was a survival tool. Squads learned to move with ruthless coordination. One man hurled grenades to flush out defenders, while another leveled the M3 to sweep the cave entrance in steady bursts. The weapon's compactness allowed quick pivots in the twisting galleries of stone, its recoil manageable even when fired from awkward positions. The subdued, almost cough-like report blended into the chaos of battle, but at close quarters it delivered decisive results. Japanese troops, trained to launch last-second rushes with bayonets, often found their charge cut down in an instant by the heavy 45 ACP slugs. For the Marines, those precious seconds spelled the difference between life and death. Military analysts later noted that the M3 represented a new kind of battlefield logic. It was not a sniper's weapon, nor did it pretend to dominate at range. Instead, it owned the lethal space between 10 and 50 yards, the very zone where Pacific combat so often unfolded. While rifles struggled to adjust in the suffocating terrain, the grease gun provided reliability under the worst conditions: sand-clogging magazines, salt air corroding metal, tropical humidity soaking gear. Soldiers reported that even when caked with volcanic ash, the M3 still fired, its crude simplicity proving its worth. At Iwo Jima, the weapon's value extended beyond infantry squads. Tank infantry coordination often broke down under the punishing terrain, leaving isolated groups to fend for themselves. In these desperate moments, an M3 tucked into a Sherman or clutched by a machine gunner suddenly stripped of his primary weapon was the line between being overrun and holding firm. The Marines who fought across those ridges did not admire the M3 for its looks. They trusted it because it worked in the worst hell imaginable, when no other weapon seemed suited for the fight. Okinawa, spring of 1945. The largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater was also one of the bloodiest. Waves of Marines and soldiers pressed inland across ridges, sugarcane fields, and rain-soaked hills that concealed well-prepared Japanese positions. The defenders fought with artillery, mortars, and suicide charges that pushed American units into brutal close-quarters clashes. In this environment, the grease gun became a weapon of attrition, not just for shock encounters, but for sustained combat over weeks of grinding advance. For riflemen advancing across ridgelines under machine gun fire, the M1 Garand remained essential. But when positions had to be stormed, stone by stone, trench by trench, it was the M3 that soldiers pulled from their slings. Its collapsible stock allowed quick adjustments in the cramped confines of foxholes or while sliding into muddy trenches. Troops could fire short bursts to conserve ammunition, yet each 45 ACP round carried enough stopping power to put down an opponent even through foliage or makeshift barricades. The grease gun's rhythm was slower, deliberate, and steady, a contrast to the frantic tempo of the battlefield around it. American tank crews also relied heavily on the weapon during Okinawa. Kamikaze teams sometimes charged tanks with explosives, trying to disable them at close range. The M3, stored in racks within Shermans and half-tracks, allowed crewmen to leap out and unleash sudden fire against attackers. Its compact form made it ideal for such quick responses. One armored officer later remarked that having a grease gun inside the vehicle was like carrying an insurance policy. It might not be the prettiest, but it was always there when needed most. Japanese defenders had long underestimated America's willingness to adapt. Their doctrine emphasized close combat, often dismissing American small arms as cumbersome. But the grease gun undercut that assumption. Reports captured after the battle described enemy officers warning their men of the silent American gun, a weapon that fired with less noise but devastating effect. To those who carried it, the description was fitting. Okinawa marked the culmination of the grease gun's Pacific service. In every engagement, from ridges blasted by artillery to caves reeking of cordite and deathwick, proved the principle that had birthed it. Victory in modern war belonged not to the elegant, but to the efficient and relentless. When the war in the Pacific finally ground to its close in the summer of 1945, the grease gun had already earned a reputation far greater than its crude appearance suggested. Veterans remembered it not for beauty or craftsmanship, but for its dependability in moments when nothing else seemed to matter. In foxholes filled with mud, on beaches littered with shrapnel, or in tanks rattling under fire, it had proven itself. Yet its significance went beyond battlefield utility. It embodied the American way of war. The United States had entered the conflict facing a problem of scale. How could a democracy supply millions of citizen soldiers spread across two vast oceans? The answer was not in finely machined masterpieces, but in weapons that could be built quickly, cheaply, and in overwhelming numbers. The M3 was perhaps the purest expression of that philosophy. Where Germany poured resources into precision weapons like the G44 or the MG42, America stamped out grease guns by the hundreds of thousands, each costing less than a decent wristwatch. It was not an artisan's rifle, it was an assembly line solution. Critics often point out its flaws. The original crank-style charging handle was fragile, the dust cover sometimes failed, and its plain steel body offered no elegance. But flaws were tolerated because the weapon could be replaced faster than it could be broken. For every grease gun lost in a cave collapse or jammed beyond repair, another waited in a crate. To the American soldier, that reliability of supply was as valuable as the weapon's performance itself. In the Pacific, this philosophy gave squads confidence. They knew they were never alone, never underarmed. The arsenal of democracy flowed across the Pacific on Liberty ships, delivering fresh ammunition and replacements at a scale the Japanese could never match. A weapon's true worth is measured not only in its lethality, but in the assurance it provides. The M3 gave that assurance to countless Marines and soldiers who slung it across their shoulders and stepped forward into the next fight. When asked after the war what they thought of the grease gun, many veterans smiled wryly. It was ugly, yes, but it worked. And in the desperate crucible of the Pacific, that was all that mattered. In the decades after the Pacific War, the M3 did not fade into obscurity. Instead, it lingered in American arsenals, carried by tank crews in Korea, issued to advisors in Vietnam, and even checked out from armories in Europe well into the Cold War. For a weapon born as a stopgap, its endurance was remarkable. Soldiers who gripped it in jungles or armored hatches often admitted it was never beloved, yet it was trusted, a companion shaped by necessity rather than admiration. Historians often argue that the grease gun was symbolic of a turning point in American military design. It revealed that wars were not won by perfection, but by sufficiency applied at scale. The United States understood this in ways its enemies often overlooked. Japan's soldiers fought with courage, but their weapons industry could not sustain the long struggle. German engineers produced marvels of precision, but in limited numbers. America's grease gun, crude though it was, could be handed to every squad, slipped into every Sherman, and stocked in every supply dump. The psychology of abundance weighed heavily on opponents who knew they faced not only men, but machines of endless production. The Pacific campaigns taught harsh lessons. Dense jungles, cave fortresses, and suicidal charges demanded weapons that were simple, reliable, and immediately deadly at close range. The M3 was all of those things. It lacked the romance of the Springfield rifle or the notoriety of the Thompson, but it earned a quieter respect. In after-action reports, commanders noted how easily troops adapted to it, how often it saved lives when ammunition was tight and seconds mattered. For the American soldier slogging through mud, sand, and rain, the grease gun became a paradox, mocked for its looks, revered for its results. When veterans gathered years later to tell their stories, they spoke of its awkward shape, its heavy bolt, its crude steel frame. But then they paused, remembering nights on Saipan, days on Iwo Jima, or ridges on Okinawa when it spat fire and held back the dark. And so, the legacy of the grease gun in the Pacific is not one of elegance, but of trust. Against an enemy that fought with ferocity, U.S. soldiers found in this unlikely weapon a partner that did not fail.